Hi, welcome to my channel. I'm Steve Down. This is my guitar. If you're just joining us, this is the fourth week in our study of Jim Hall's incredible version of All the Things You Are. In the last 3 weeks, we've looked at the head, we've looked at the first chorus and also the second chorus of his solos. And this week, we're going to take a dive into what he does when he's trading 8's with the drummer Akira Tana. And we're going to touch very briefly on his approach to comping underneath the bass solo. Before we do all of that, I just want to say a big thank you to all my patrons. As usual, there's been a number of you that have signed up, so I'm just going to read out your names. So big thanks to Another Cassidy, Matthew, Swilly, Jeff, and Logan, who signed up in the last 2 weeks. I really value all your support. It helps me to keep the lights on here and keep going. If you want to benefit from all of the transcriptions, the backing tracks, and also the exercise and scale chords, arpeggio packs, basically anything that you see on screen here, and a little bit more, then head over to Patreon. The link is here to be able to get to my page and have all of those benefits. There's a couple of different tiers on there. So the first one gets you access to everything you see here. The second one gets you all of the access, as in the first tier, and also the ability to be able to commission me to write a transcription for you of one of the tunes that you might want a transcription for or be working on. And then the third tier gets you all of that, but also gets you a 1-to-1 hour lesson with me online as well. So head over to Patreon if you want to take a look at that. If you want to support in a one-off fashion, just to say thanks for this lesson, but you don't want to do a subscription, then below is a link to buy me a coffee, which I love and helps me to be able to deal with my children early in the morning. And if you just want to say a thanks to the lesson, but you don't want to do it in a financial way, then just mash that subscribe button and the like button and hit the bell if you want to get updates on when I release my next video. So let's crack on, guys and girls. So the first thing I want to take a look at is just a brief kind of overview of how Jim's approaching playing underneath the bass solo by Steve LeSpinner. It's an incredible bass solo, and the way that Jim approaches it is amazing. So there's a couple of things to think about here. The first one is that Jim keeps out of the range of the bass player. Obviously, the bass player has a very low range, but he can go higher up as well. Just remember that bass players do have quite a big range from low to high. So it's important that you use your ears to listen to where they are. Now, if you listen to the beginning of Steve's solo on there, he's starting off down quite low, and Jim starts off using voicings that are in the upper range of the guitar. So here's a transcription of the first 8 bars of what Jim does. So you can see that he's keeping out of the range. That's really important because when you hear that live, or you're listening on a record, you don't want to be getting in the same range as the bass player or any other instrumentalist, because otherwise the listener isn't going to be able to hear what the soloist is doing. And remember, you are a supporting role here. Your role is basically to keep the harmonic support going on underneath, not to be trying to outshine them. So keep out of their range. Make sure you got those ears on all the time. The second thing that Jim's doing here is he's playing really sparsely. He's not doing a Freddie Green playing on each quarter note here. He's playing really, really sparsely to, again, make sure that the listener is able to appreciate and follow the melody and the trajectory of Steve LeSpinner's bass solo. Equally with that, don't feel like you have to play all of the changes. Jim doesn't. In all the way through the solo, he doesn't play all of the changes. Sometimes he misses out a couple of bars of chords in order to, again, let the melody of the bass player shine through. Okay, so there's a good example of it here. Over the 2-5 into C major, he literally just plays a G13. So he ignores the D minor there again. One other thing which I can't hear Jim doing in this 8-bar example, but what he does later on in the solo, is to pick up on some rhythmic ideas, and we're gonna look at that in his response to Akira Tana's drum solo, where he'll pick up on his rhythmic ideas as well. But it's something to do when you're comping as well as soloing and trading, is to pick up on rhythmic ideas that they're playing. Don't do it all of the time, because otherwise it's just going to get overbearing, and it will seem like you, as the supporting comping role, is trying to outshine the soloist. So, you know, you can just refer to it slightly. If they do something like, you might want to go like that, you know, just behind it, just as a kind of like an answer phrase, just as a kind of like a nod to say, I'm with you, I'm supporting you, but not trying to get, you know, it in underneath their feet. So that's quite short and sweet. And no, I haven't transcribed the entire comping part there, as I don't think I really need to for the purposes of this study. But I just wanted to give you a few hints and tips about how to go about supporting a soloist as a harmonic instrument. So let's take a look at the trading solo. So just to set ourselves up here, what Jim's doing with Akira on this particular section of the tune is he's trading 8's. Now, trading 8's is basically where one soloist will take 8 bars of the form, and then another soloist will take the next 8 bars, and the next 8 bars, and so on and so forth. Now, All the Things You Are is a weird 36-bar form, so it doesn't divide into 8 quite as easily as 32 does. So what we end up with is Jim takes the first 8 bars, Akira takes the next 8 bars, Jim takes another 8 bars, and then Akira takes 12 bars at the end. And then we head back into the final head, which we'll look at next week. There's some really important things that we need to consider when we're trading with another instrumentalist. The first one that we need to consider is the fact that it is a conversation, not a competition. So we're not trying to outdo each other when we're in a trading situation. So it's a conversation. So Jim starts off first, and he starts off with this phrase. Now, obviously, Jim started first, so he gets to put the point across, the initial point across, just like in a conversation. And the initial point that he puts across okay, quite a fun point. What he's doing over the top of this, he's starting off on the D flat, and he's running down the A flat major scale there, and then chromatically heading towards the flat 7 of E flat, the D flat there. So it's a really, really cool and melodic tool that he's used here. He's running down the scale, heading for a note which he knows is going to outline that chord. Now, the flat 7 is not always the best one to spell out the chord underneath, but he's picked it and it does work. And then in the next bar, we've got this. Now, this is Jim again. If you've watched any of the last episodes, we've been talking about how Jim likes to treat this one chord, the A flat major 7, as a dominant 7th chord, as a secondary dominant heading towards that D flat, which is the next chord. And so he's doing that by bringing out the flat 7 of A flat, the G flat there. And then he repeats the phrase and goes down to the 3rd of D flat. So really, really cool little melodic device, repeating the triplet phrase, landing this time on the F, which is the 3rd of D flat major. And then, just like I highlighted in the comping example earlier, in the next couple of bars, he again just ignores the D minor. And, you know, if you've seen the last couple of episodes, you'll see that I'm talking about that as well. When we've got lots of chords just squished together in one bar, you can't really reference all of them without it sounding unmelodic and just sounding like an exercise. So just take the one that is probably the most overarching dominant chord, pun intended there, to reference. And so that's exactly what Jim does here. So he's going to the B there, which is the 3rd of G7. So he's ignored the D minor altogether. this is a really cool little thing that he does at the end here. He uses a scale called the Mixolydian flat 6, which is a modal scale. It's the 5th mode of the melodic minor. And essentially, it's a Mixolydian scale with a flat 6, exactly what it says on the tin. So we're going to A flat instead of A. So here is that slowed down. Now this is really cool. It gives kind of like an outside idea with that A flat. It just gives you a bit more of a kind of an outside sound. It's almost kind of like superimposing a G7 flat 9 over the top of the C. So it's kind of like doing superimposing a 5-1 whilst we've still got the 1 chord running underneath. And Jim can easily do this because he doesn't have any accompaniment going on underneath, or even the bass player going on underneath. So he can really do whatever he likes here. But it's just a really nice device. It's a great scale to use. I love it. And it's also in one of my favourite Led Zeppelin songs, 10 Years Gone. So Jim sets up the conversation here. Akira is going to respond to that in the next 8 bars. Now, a little tip as we get into the next 8 bars. There are no melodic instruments or harmonic instruments going along at the same time as Akira's solo. It's purely just drums for 8 bars. You need to be counting with this. Otherwise, you might end up coming back in the wrong part, either too early or too late. So it's really important that you count along with this. Perhaps you could even sing the melody in your head, or you could do what I first did in order to be able to train myself to be able to count properly over the top of a trading solo situation, was basically where I would just kind of finger out the chords going by without actually strumming them, so that I could just keep time and I knew where we were in the form. So we have Akira's 8-bar response. And then we're going to move on now to Jim's response to that. Jim's response here, I think, is him picking up on a rhythmic idea. Akira seems to be pushing the time a bit. He seems to be playing phrases that are starting on the and of 4 or the and of 2. He's pushing ahead of the beat. And this is kind of what Jim does here. So with that line, he's pushing ahead every time. And I think he's picked up on something that Akira's done. Now, it may not jump out to you at like the way that it's jumped out to Jim. Now, whether Jim did or did not hear this offbeat rhythm, which I can hear in there and responded to it, I still think that it's important that when you're listening to soloists, when you're listening to soloists in a trading situation, that you listen hard, because there may well be a rhythmic phrase which could inspire your response. So here's a little exercise here where I've responded to Joe, who's done the drums beautifully for the backing track for this. The figure that I've responded to is kind of a drum roll-y kind of figure. It's a crescendoing, what I hear as a rising figure. This is it here. This is an example of it here. And so I've responded to that with a rising figure. And I've done a similar thing, I've carried it on. So I've just carried that rising figure on, that intensity on. So his figure has inspired my response. And that's where you can have a rhythmic conversation between the two of you. Here's another example of picking up on a rhythmic idea and running with it. He's played an offbeat figure on there, and so I've responded to that. And here I'm repeating the offbeat rhythm. So this is another way that you can do it, where you take the rhythm and you repeat the rhythm and take it through the permutations. So here what I did was I took the A minor, this line here, started on the end of 1, and then moved it up a minor third, which is a really good way of creating an outside sound. You can move any phrase up a minor third and you'll instantaneously get an outside sound. So and then I've gone for another kind of offbeat figure in the next 4 bars. So just a couple of ideas there about how to go about handling a trading situation. Remember that it is a conversation. That is absolutely fundamental. So you can be the person starting off the conversation like Jim right at the beginning, or you could be the person responding to it. And remember, you're going to have to respond and also start the conversation at points. So it's good to be prepared for both. Jim starts off the conversation in a fairly kind of basic way, just running the A flat major scale down and targeting a few key chord tones there. But when he responds to it what I think is an offbeat figure that Akira plays in there. And use the demonstrations that I've given you there where I've responded to Joe's drum flurry and also to an offbeat situation. And try that in your own playing. What you could do if you've got some recording software is you could take a recording of any classic jazz record where there's a trading situation, have a listen to the drummer playing, and then mute the next few bars and come up with your own response to it. And keep that on loop. I hope this has been helpful to you. Please feel free to put any questions or any comments below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe and the like button. And if you want to get all of the exercises that you've seen on screen today and the transcription of this week's excerpt and also all of the previous weeks as well, head over to Patreon. The link is here. And I will see you next week where we will finish off the entire series by looking at the head and the coda at the end. Happy practicing. I'll see you next time.